So listen, good morning, everybody. I think we'll make a start. Thanks for joining us, and thanks very much to Philip Crowe and Orla Murphy who are with us to present the strategic priority project Centre for Irish Towns that started last year. This time, so all introduced it right at the outset, and so this time it's Philip's turn to do all the talking. But I suspect Orla will be happy to get involved with the questions that might flow afterwards. So thanks very much indeed, and take it away, Philip.
Okay, thanks, Taz. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I've got a very short amount of time, so in this short presentation, I'm going to try and provide you with some background as to why we are doing this, why we're setting up a Centre for Irish Towns, and also a snapshot on progress and next steps. So if I can figure out how to move the slides forward. So why towns? Why are we setting this up? Well, towns are obviously really important, and they are a critical part of our cultural, social and economic structure and fabric. And interestingly, roughly a third of the population of Ireland lives in towns as opposed to living in the 5 cities or in rural locations. And they evidently have huge potential to facilitate sustainable development and sustainable communities. And yet many, if not most, Irish towns are very evidently in decline, and they face multiple challenges. And I suppose a very visual version of that is the problem of ongoing long-term vacancy and dereliction, and a lack of investment in the physical and social fabric of our towns. And from our research and practice, Orla and myself are very aware that many of the challenges experienced by towns are exacerbated or sustained by things like a lack of data and knowledge on our towns. We know very little about our towns, in fact, and a lack of joined up thinking and a lack of a coherent evidence-based approach in terms of governance, policy and funding. So if I go on to the next slide, so what are we proposing? Well, we're proposing to help address these challenges with a Centre for Irish Towns, which we describe as a transdisciplinary centre for research and collaboration based in UCD, focused on the towns of the island of Ireland. And we've been using this tool, which is a theory of change, which we find quite useful because it allows us to sort of map out on one piece of paper in one view how the centre might affect change. So I've highlighted some of the columns, and these work from the left to the right. So in the left, you have what's the problem you're trying to solve, and on the right, you have the long-term change that you see as your goal. So the 4 columns I've highlighted just to go through them. The problems are listed. We've gone through those just very briefly. The key, who's our audience, and you'll find yourselves are in that list. The 3rd column then looks at what steps do we need to take, and I will hopefully describe those a little bit later. And then the measurable effects, which are fairly self-evident, but things like research outputs and funding opportunities and citizen engagement. So why now? What are the opportunities for this? Well, it's really clear that there's a growing consensus or realization that change is urgently needed. So for example, we can look at 2 recent government documents or government initiatives. The first one on the left there is the Programme for Government, which has a commitment to the development of a town centre first policy. That in itself is a first. And this has been actively promoted by the Green Party, who are actively advocating for a Centre for Irish Towns, a research centre, to be a key part of this. Then on the right, we have the Town Centre Living Initiative, which was looking at 6 pilot towns in terms of vacancy and why people don't live in the centre of towns. And this resulted in a synthesis report, which myself and Orla and another colleague, Madeleine Lies, wrote recently, in which we made 15 suggestions for key actions. I've just put 6 up on the slide. And these obviously include a research centre on towns, and we might have repeated that several times through the report. And there is a working group being set up for that. And then on the left, the Heritage Council has in many ways been the most vociferous state agency or organisation in advocating for action on towns over many years, and they are promoting a governance approach where a very small agile unit, which they call the Ireland's Towns Partnership, and that's based on a Scottish precedent, would coordinate actions on towns. And critically, that would be supported in terms of research and an evidence base by a Centre for Irish Towns. And then on the right, obviously it's very early to understand the full implications, but there is COVID and it's having a huge impact. So all of a sudden we are all remote working. That, well, not all of us, but it is being normalized to be remote working, and attitudes appear to be shifting in relation to who and what we value when it comes to where we live, where we work, and where we play. And the discourse around the pandemic is very much involving towns, it put towns to the fore. So we have commentators like David McWilliams in the Irish Times, who never short or never shy, I suppose, of a catchphrase, is heralding what he calls the great switch, which is where city centres will become more residential and regional towns become more commercial. I'm sure we could have a long discussion on that one, but it is an interesting premise. We also think that the centre presents a lot of opportunities in terms of UCD, at the scale of UCD, and that it aligns with all four pillars of the UCD strategy. We're developing very actively links with Queen's University through collaboration on shared challenges on a shared island, and that's being led, as far as I can make out, by the Schools of Architecture in both universities. And we're also hopeful that it might support a new collaborative research area under the UCD and University of Edinburgh Memorandum of Agreement, which I think was signed maybe a couple of years ago at this stage. And we're talking actively with a new institute there called the Edinburgh Futures Institute. So what have we been doing? Well, I suppose the first thing is that we've set up a fantastic working group that is listed on the slide, and it represents many different schools, and we've been meeting monthly for maybe the last 7 or 8 months. And basically we've been trying to do two things. We've been trying to build a network and to make a case for a centre and put some shape on it, understand what it might be. So we've carried out a number of workshops, principally in UCD and TUD, and had many conversations around those with interested parties. And those have been to explore what relevant research exists, develop a network and a database, and to identify high-level challenges and themes to sort of co-create the centre. And all of these have been helping to put a shape on what the centre might be. I suppose observations on those workshops and conversations have been that there is significant interest in being involved. There's a recognised need for a centre. Research relating to towns has been carried out by a very diverse range of disciplines, maybe some that would surprise people, but there isn't an awful lot of evidence of collaboration and awareness across different disciplines or schools. So the workshops tend to be very much about making new connections and new introductions. During the workshops, we did ask participants how a centre might be useful to them, and they suggested roles that are generally aligned with what we had been thinking, but also some additional ones. So things like collaboration for funding, bringing together diverse perspectives, creating networks of researchers and practitioners, influencing policy through research, and changing the perception of towns. And then things like podcasts and exhibitions relating to towns. So we synthesized, sorry, I always have trouble with that word, identified challenges and interests into 8 themes that will hopefully consolidate and evolve over time. At the moment, they cover all bases, and it's quite a challenging thing to do. And APA has been mapping these onto the SDGs, which has been a really useful and formative exercise. So you can see the list on, as it stands at the moment on your screen. The image is from the UCD workshop. So it goes from just basically understanding our towns more, getting good data on our towns, and then goes on to things like open and participatory democracy and just low carbon transition. A more recent lockdown workshop with TUD used Miro. Orla set up a Miro working whiteboard, and that worked really well, and we will be using that for future workshops. So this diagram is basically us exploring what shape an ideal centre might be. So it's obviously a very aspirational framework, I suppose. The idea would be to try and get some strands of this up and running in the near future, and hopefully it might grow from that and grow into this framework. So we have the themes on the left, and the idea would be to develop teams for some of these themes, and then to generate funded projects, which are in the middle of the diagram, that might work across the themes and across the teams. We've also developed a draft short, medium and long-term funding strategy with the help of the Earth Institute and UCD Research. And you can see the relevant SDGs. I think size refers to how relevant they are. So in terms of next steps, we are going to be carrying out further workshops, principally with Queen's in November and Trinity in December. We're going to continue to talk to other institutions and stakeholders and make more connections, revise and further develop that framework and make a business case, and then ultimately apply for teaching and research centre status from the Academic Council Committee on Academic Centres. We are also going to develop communications tools such as a briefing document or brochure, because we're finding we need to pitch to potential funders and collaborators often at very short notice. So I'm quite sure my 10 minutes is up and Emily is impatient for me to wrap up. So I will stop there, but just before I stop, if I could take this opportunity to thank the Earth Institute for their funding and support for this, UCD Research, the working group, and all the participants in the workshops for supporting the initiative. So thanks for your attention.
Thanks very much indeed, Philip. That was fantastic. It's really great to see all of those connections being made, and really nice to see rooms full of people talking about stuff too, which is a historic event these days. I also very much like the fact that you had jellies at the centre of your network map. I think that's an important feature.
Yeah, that was Orla's idea.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? I had one in terms of, so it was also really good. I saw that when the programme for government came out, that the commitment to towns, and it was interesting to hear also your comment about the Green Party pushing for a research centre, and I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on those things. Are you aware of whether the government has already started taking steps to follow through on that commitment, and are you in contact with the advocates of the research centre?
Yes. Orla, do you want to take, as you've been more involved with the Green Party aspect?
Yeah, I mean, it was really good. I think the Green Party approached us during the programme for government talks, partly as a result of, it kind of came out of an awareness of what we were doing through when Free Market were invited into the Dáil Committee last November, Dáil Committee on Rural Community Development. And so we started to kind of forge some political links, because it became very clear that towns really can't change on their own, that local authorities are not empowered. And that's partly to do, I think, with the removal of town councils a number of years ago. So some higher level of political action has got to happen if there's to be systemic change in town. So it became very clear that that a conversation at the highest level of government would be needed. So we were, Free Market were invited into the Dáil Committee last November, and that kind of made some connections politically. And then the Green Party approached us during the programme for government talks and just asked us what they felt we could contribute to those conversations about a town centre first policy. So I mean, it's not just us, the Heritage Council are very active in that area as well. And what is working at the moment is that there are the people in Ireland, because the country is so small, who are interested in this area are very connected and are singing from the same singing from the same hymn sheet. So they're asking high level government for two things. Firstly, an Ireland's Towns partnership based on the Scottish model, and the second main thing that they're asking for is an academic centre to back up policy with evidence-based data. And so those two things were accepted and kind of nailed into the town centre first policy and informed that. But now I think that the pandemic has obviously overtaken a lot of the political conversation and energy and time. And the government are slightly behind now in implementing the town centre first policy. The building on the town centre, the living initiative, I think that's one clear step that is felt that can be taken. So the momentum that was gained with the 6 towns that were part of that programme, there's a kind of a clear win there, because those towns are now set up to move forward. There's less momentum, I would say, on the Ireland's Towns partnership at the moment, partly because Some sectors see that as a devolution of their powers, local authorities in particular, and some levels of the civil service. So it's really interesting to be involved in that kind of political level, and to get a little glimpse of the mechanisms at work. But we're a very small country, so you can generally get access to a lot of people quite easily, and they're willing to listen and they're willing to hear what they're saying. And it has been accepted by everyone we've spoken to that that more data is needed, and understanding what's happening in towns and backing up policy with better evidence, which isn't there at the moment. So I think that's clearly understood. So hopefully we're kind of pushing an open door there, but gaining support for it then as we move further, particularly, and it's even more important now in the light of COVID and the how that plays out in terms of cities and towns and the changing challenges and opportunities that they face.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I thought the connection with COVID, and the implications of COVID for towns really does help to keep the momentum there, and again keep it current in people's thinking. So no, that's fantastic. And any other questions?
Can I ask a question?
Please, Orla.
Yeah. First of all, so I'm new and I didn't know about this initiative. It's fabulous. It's so amazing. It's so great. I'm from a small Irish town, so this is so needed. It's really, so congratulations. And then I'm really interested to know, beyond the kind of local heritage centre, who are those people at the workshop? Who are the local stakeholders that are kind of getting involved in this? I imagine that there's like local businesses and schools and all that are crying out for this kind of attention. So have you kind of gone to that level of local stakeholder input at this point, or kind of who have you really been at the kind of town level engaging with?
So, well, we could both answer that. I suppose the first thing to say is that in terms of the Centre for Irish Towns as the academic centre, and those workshops have been primarily to do with building a capacity or a network within the research community. But both Orla and myself have been working on projects that have been working in towns. So Orla, I mean, you might say something in a second about the free market work. But I was involved with one of the pilot towns in the Town Centre Living Initiative up in Castleblaney, and many other towns. And within every town, you come across, say, a town team or a regeneration committee, or Castleblaney had a climate change team or group. I can't remember what they call themselves. So there's always sort of defined groups that are there that you can work with, that are very interested in making the town better. And there's enormous energy and really admirable work going on in almost every town that you come across, I think it's fair to say. But in terms of hearing the voices of people, it's really rare for that to come through in government documents. I mean, the government thinks that, so just take the one thing that I know something about, which is vacancy. They're quite convinced that that's to do with finances. And yes, finances are not unrelated to it, but actually there's an awful lot of other factors involved in it. And so when we were actually talking to people one-to-one in a sort of property clinic, you find out the extraordinary complexity of what's going on in the towns, and no town is ever the same, obviously. Then on another level of consultation, Orly, maybe you just describe the free market experience.
Yeah, I mean, as Philip was saying, Orla, Philip and I really kind of came to this idea that for an academic centre for Irish towns, based on our research in architectural practice, a lot of which was based in public engagement and an interest in co-design and participatory planning, particularly as opposed to the consultative model that previously was the main form of, for example, negotiating development plans. So co-design being more about trying to listen to local stakeholders and putting emphasis on that to really try to understand, gather information and benefit from the experience of people who live in the towns, who really are the best people to know the nuance, they know the history, they know a lot of the kind of subtle challenges that exist in the place that they're very familiar with. So free market was to describe it very, very quickly, was the Irish Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2018, which was concerned with public space in Irish towns. And its national tour in 2019 toured to 4 towns. We pitched up the pavilion with a bespoke public engagement program in 4 towns: Castleblaney, Macroom, Kilmallock and Mountmellick. And it was based on setting up shop for 4 days in each town, and really in a quite structured way, listening to the people who knew those towns to kind of to gather their thoughts and their stories and to record them. So and I suppose it's kind of, as Philip was saying, it's how we listen to and are open to hearing those kind of very wise and experienced stories in towns is really important, because we can often kind of draw conclusions which aren't based on actual experience. So we're putting an emphasis on participatory planning and co-design, and it's in the 15 actions that we gathered as part of the Town Centre Living Initiative. There's quite a large emphasis on the importance of really good participatory planning, co-design in any kind of program for a town centre first policy.
Great. Thank you for indulging me there. That's great. So interesting. Thank you.
There's a couple of questions that have come through in the chat. Have you spotted them, Philip, or would you like me to read them out?
So Dean is asking, how well has collaborating with other universities worked so far, and are there any ideas for getting students in universities involved? So I suppose there's 2 parts to that. Collaborating with the other universities, at the moment, we're basically trying to make connections with those other universities. I suppose the collaboration with Queen's is very much up and running, because that's been pushed by the School of Architecture. But the other universities generally are extremely interested, particularly TUD, and I know Cork is very interested. And Trinity is very interested in getting involved, but we are at very early stages. But we're very, very keen that it would involve all the other universities on the island. In terms of getting students involved, I really only know the perspective coming from the School of Architecture, Planning, Environmental Policy and Landscape Architecture. I see Sophia there. There's a number of people on this call. So there's Sophia, Orla, Alan, me, Liana Ricci, and Paula Russell, who are all working with students on towns from the design or planning perspective. But I think we probably will find over time that there are other examples in other disciplines, and I think some of that did come out in some workshops. But certainly there's acres of material there for students to get involved with. And I mean, Orla, do you want to say something about what a valuable experience that can be in terms of the student work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a resource that can be made much more of, in a way. In architecture, we always had a kind of a long history of working in Irish towns, and the same goes across planning and environmental policy and landscape. But it tends to happen in a slightly ad hoc basis, maybe. And it would be really wonderful to see some of that work across disciplines and across institutions gathered, so that we can kind of build on say master's research, master's dissertations, on PhD work, and know what everybody is doing, and how particularly transdisciplinary research among students, I think, has a lot of potential to get more out of it, for towns themselves, and for the benefit of teaching and learning, and for the students' experience.
I see a comment there, Taz, from Sophia, saying it's a shame that we don't manage multidisciplinary studios. And I mean, I think we would maybe agree with that.
Yeah,
but I know it has been tried. I mean, and one of the things that yourself, Taz, and myself have been trying to do is sort of bring that sort of design, multi-system problem solving that goes on over in Richview closer to work that's going on in the Earth Institute. And I think there's huge potential there, because we need imagination, we need the ability to understand things spatially and at different levels and different systems, to try and address some of these challenges. And towns just make a great scale for understanding a lot of these challenges and what can work and what doesn't work.
And we took a tiny step in Callan last year, the year before last actually, for the first time ever, planning and Masters in Architecture students worked together in Callan. And what was extraordinary was that, in my experience, that was the first shared project that planning students and architecture students had worked on together simultaneously, and benefited from each other's disciplines and perspectives and approaches. Now, so the potential, to widen that into students of who understand food, who understand social policy, who understand environmental policy, or geography in humanities, the potential is enormous. So hopefully that's something that the Centre for Irish Towns as well could facilitate in terms of teaching and learning.
Absolutely, yeah, no, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, can I say just Paula Russell here, and I'd concur with Orla. I mean, we was a group of students that I was working with that worked with on Callan, and it was really great to hear our students really. I mean, I think our students benefited more from hearing what the architects said, because they were undergraduate students, and the architects were in fourth years.
Fourth year,
So
yeah. So first year masters.
But what was really good was they were able to use and look at the sort of the designs that the architects had been doing, and even just react to them as planning students. So that was brilliant. And I think we've done a few projects where little pieces of the work that students have done have been able to feed into something wider. So for example, in Monaghan, we did a town study in Monaghan, and our students did the land use survey, and that was very helpful for the local authority then to be able to see vacancy rates and then build on that, make a pitch for some funding to get people to do more detailed design for that part of the town. So I mean, it's been through that, and through working with the Heritage Council and their town centre health checks, that has been really good as well. So I think that there's lots of opportunities to work with other agencies and with students. It's just, I suppose, getting all the pieces in a row and getting them done in time. I think sometimes it's having a little bit of foresight, and I really would welcome more sort of that cross-disciplinary stuff.
Right. There's one other question there on the board. We're about to run out of time. And Noreen was asking if brainstorming workshops themselves involve people external to academia.
Well, not so far in terms of being on purpose, but there were a lot of people who were outside of academia who came to the UCD workshop. We are trying to understand the research centre world in the first place, but the idea is that this centre is a link to other stakeholders, to state agencies, to different civil society organizations, to government departments, etc. So that is very much the ambition of it. It's not that we don't want it to remain a closed university. I mean, that would make no sense. It needs to be actively working directly with communities, directly with decision makers, to be relevant. So we do intend to try and do that, but we have sort of limited resources and time, etc. But that is definitely in there, I think it's fair to say.
It's nice to see there's a comment there from Dean Britton, the third year spatial planning student at TU Dublin, excuse me, about badgering the lecturers over here to get more involved so they can make more, so more can happen. So, a lot of this is about drawing attention to a subject that is important to so many people. A third of the population, as Philip mentioned in the talk earlier, of Ireland, and it's also not just an Irish question. It's it's common to most European countries, and countries around the world. So there's so much potential. So the kind of first aim of the centre, I guess, is to open up that conversation to people who are understanding towns in different ways, who have different skills and experiences, and who find connections and synapses across that. So what we would love in the next year is maybe for one or two projects or one or two PhDs to emerge that would that CFIT could support and that could work under the CFIT umbrella through UCD or beyond, that could start to begin to make a difference in terms of providing that level of data and evidence that could meaningfully contribute to how this problem is to be tackled in the future. Because I suppose maybe just, as I walked through Westport this morning, and part of my 5K, again, just seeing the town closed was a strange experience. And there are potentially really interesting things that are happening. The agility of businesses to flip quite quickly in response to these big changes has been very heartening. Seeing people really want to take over the streets in terms of improving public space so that we can be outdoors together in public space has been really heartening. But on the other hand, that the inertia and the lack of actual proper permanent physical spatial change is very disheartening for somebody who's been looking at towns now for quite a long time. So we're going to just continue to shout it from the rooftops and invite anybody who wants to join us in that conversation to be part of it, with whatever background they have, and to lend their experience to what we think is really a really important subject.
Thanks very much, Orla. That's a great note to leave it on. I have to run as well now. So really fantastic to hear all about that, and thanks everyone for getting involved, and thanks Dean for that offer. I'm sure you'll be taken up on it by Philip and Orla. Great. So all the best for the rest of the day, and see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.